getting lumped up with RockerMike and Rob Rossi. I'm getting lumped up with RockerMike and Rob Rossi. Well, I'm lumped up, but I'm okay. It's gonna get lumped up anyway. You better call back the posse. Just getting lumped up with RockerMike and Rob Rossi. Getting lumped up with RockerMike and Rob Rossi.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another RockerMike and Rob Presents show. Today we have very special guest, Jim Basnight, formerly
Jim
of
Basnight.
the
No big deal. No
Basnight. Sorry,
yeah,
Basnight.
No big whoop.
Formerly of the power pop band, the Moberlys, founding member of that band, and he has had a very long, incredible career, very varied, different things going on. We're going to talk about all that. He's got some new stuff out. He's also been involved lately with Big Stir Records, so shout out to Big Stir. They've been very nice to us, and we're happy to be involved with them. Before we start, I want to just have a little cheers.
Cheers.
We are trying a new beer today. It is called Motorhead beer, as in the band. So cheers, brother.
Cheers.
Let's see. I never had.
I'm recovering, so I'm drinking a Coca-Cola.
Ooh, that's pretty good.
Not bad.
Not bad.
Not bad. I recommend it. For $6 a can, it's not bad.
Cool.
All right, Jim. So thanks for coming on. I really appreciate it. And you contacted us through Big Stir and everything, and that was great. I was really happy to hear from you. You got some stuff going on now, but just to have some context, I want to go back a few years. Okay. Now, originally you're from Philly, right?
Yeah, originally from Philly. Lived early in my life in New York, in Queens, and up in Westchester County a little bit, in Pelham, and then my dad got a job in Queens in Corona, and we moved to Corona for a while until I was about 5 years old, and then at that point my dad decided he wanted to move to see back. He was from Seattle. He was born in Seattle, which is kind of a rarity. Most people out here are not born here. He was born in Seattle, and he wanted me to grow up in my sister, and who was a child, and they wanted the kids to grow up in Seattle, so we moved out to Seattle. But I've always had a really fond place in my heart for New York, and have a lot of friends in and there, and especially musicians that I've had a lot of connection with and stuff, and written a lot of songs with, and done a lot of stuff with. So I kind of feel like New York is kind of like my home, and in a lot of ways I've always been attracted to New York. One of the biggest moments of my life was the first time I heard the New York Dolls, when the first album first came out, and I had seen their pictures and stuff, and I thought they were, well, these guys are, glam. I didn't know what to expect. It could be anything, it could be really arty like Bowie or something like that, or something way out there. And I listened to him, and it was just really the most pure, simple rock and roll, like the kind that really drew me to be a musician and to want to play the guitar, and that was a big moment. And I have come to find out that a lot of those guys grew up in the same neighborhood that I lived when I was a little kid. So I remember
Johnny Thunders was from Queens, and Sylvain was from Queens.
Yeah, and I've met a couple of people from Queens, like John Carlucci, who's a DJ with a Little Steven's Underground Garage, and told me that he grew up right by Corona, right where we lived. So I remember the days when I was a little teeny boy, and that's my first impressions of rock and roll. Is some of the bigger kids, that my babysitters and stuff, had records like the Watusi and all that early stuff that the Heartbreakers and Johnny Thunders and the Dolls really championed. Bands like all that early kind of early
girl group
rock
stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Or the early girl group stuff and all that early R&B stuff. And that was my first impression of rock and roll. And I always thought it was really fun. And Elvis and the Twist and all that kind of early 60s stuff. And then we moved out to Seattle, and I kind of got sidetracked in other stuff. I wasn't really that into rock and roll for a couple of years. Well, I was only 5, but it took me a little while to really get that interested in it again. I think that probably happened when I was about 10. I got a transistor radio, my first transistor radio. I started kind of putting two and two together with you know, how cool well, these bands like the Beatles were and stuff. It was sort of secondary to me. When I was that young kid, I was interested in other things, you know, dinosaurs or whatever. But yeah, I just started really getting into rock and roll. It wasn't something that my family or my grandparents, my grandfather was kind of a rock and roll snob. He hated rock and roll. And my dad was kind of a jazz guy and he didn't care for rock and roll. So rock and roll is something I kind of picked up on my own.
Now, I know back in 77, you briefly came back to New York City for a few months. Was that to get a music career going because of what was happening down on the Lower East Side in 77 and all that?
Yeah, I was 19 years old. And just to skip along in my life story, I don't want to be too long-winded, but you know, as I got into my teens, I got involved with a bunch of other kids that were into rock and roll pretty heavy. And I was kind of supportive of a guy who had a little fanzine called the District Diary, which is this neighborhood in Seattle where the kind of most of the record stores are and stuff like that, called the U District. And we changed the name to Chatterbox, and that was my idea because of the Johnny Thunder song, the
Doll song, right?
The Doll song, yeah. And we were all big fans of that. And that was when the Dolls were, I believe, just breaking up, like in 1975.
Yeah,
they played in Seattle, but that was a pretty big deal. That was where we met a lot of our friends that later on became the kind of early kind of Seattle punk rock scene, real early, you know. Right. And then and so basically we had this fanzine and eventually put a band together within a few months. And played our first gig, which was one of the first, actually, according to historians, it was the first do-it-yourself punk rock show on the West Coast. It was like a week before the first one in London. Of course, New York was way, way the heck ahead of all that. But in fact, Alan Vega invented punk rock, the word punk rock, and I guess punk music back in he was the first one I've ever seen use it.
As a member of Suicide, right? He was using
Suicide, exactly, in 1970.
It's amazing. Seattle always had a lot of good musicians. A lot of great musicians had come out of Seattle, but they go there and they don't go back, which is also another thing that's wild. But there's a lot of great bands that had come out of there that I'm shocked. You go through history, even a lot of those grunge band, a lot of these other, like a lot of the 60s and 70s, there were guys that were in Seattle.
There was that whole, the 60s, you know this, Jim, there was that whole Northwest soul kind of thing. Yeah. You know, bands like the Sonics.
The Raiders. The Raiders were from Idaho, but they
were Revere and the Raiders. Yeah,
Seattle was the big city. Yeah, and the Whalers. The Whalers were good. Go ahead.
And going to his point, it is kind of a place in the country that's isolated. So when you're up there, you're kind of isolated from what's going on with the rest of the country. I think that's the point you're trying to make, right? Yeah.
That's very, very true. Very true. And it's funny. Lou Reed said that. He said that to our Chatterbox when we talked to him. I was unfortunately not there in the room, but he said, like, yeah, you guys are always last, you know, as far as these bands from New York and London and cool places actually getting to an American city. You guys are always last, you know, we come here finally at the very end of the line, you know, but no, seriously, you know, we were doing that. We were doing this band and we had the show going with some other kids and we had this band together and played for about a year. And that was a band called the Mice. And our last show was opening for the Ramones. The first time they played in Seattle. It was actually the first punk rock touring kind of national punk rock show in Seattle. You know, the Dolls weren't called punk rock. You know, the Lou Reed, none of that stuff was called punk rock. Iggy hadn't even played there yet. But basically that was in March. And of 27, and I met the Ramones and the road manager Arturo Vega, the late Arturo Vega. Yeah, and they were really fond of us and liked us. And Tommy Ramone said in New York Rocker that we were the best band they played with on the tour, and said a lot of nice things about us. And I just was very ambitious, and you know, I didn't really think that the band would have the ability to go with me, but I just decided to move to New York. I was 19. And because, you know, Joey told me, he goes, that this stuff would really be successful in New York. So I went out to New York and kind of toughed it out. And if you guys have seen movies like Taxi Driver and stuff like that, that's what my life was like.
That's what it was like back then. Yep.
Yeah, I was Travis Bickle, but I didn't lose it like you did. and or find it, depending on how you look at it. Yeah.
Well, we're glad you didn't lose it like that. Wow.
But what I did find was I found a lot of great rock and roll, and I saw a lot of great bands. I mean, tremendous music that really inspired me for the rest of my life. And
what was a major, like, other than the obvious Ramones and Johnny Thunders and the Heartbreakers and stuff like that? What was some of those maybe lesser known bands that you really liked at that scene during?
I'll tell you, there's some obscure ones, and it's funny because they actually have over time, sustained like a little bit. A guy named Joey Pinter was in a band called.
We know Joey very well.
Oh, yeah, it was a band called Fuse, and I saw him, and I really thought this guy's really good, and no one really has talked about him much over time. But then he was in the Waldos, and he's just a great guitar player, and that band Fuse was really good. They had a bunch of great songs. Yeah. And I thought they were especially good. I liked Robert Gordon and Link Ray. I mean, who wouldn't like that a lot? I liked. I saw some bands from out of town that were playing in at CBGBs. Like I saw DMZ. I saw the Dead Boys. Boston. The Dead Boys. They were there constantly, and I saw them a number of times. Yeah. And I saw, of course, some of the bigger names that would have already been out there with records, like the Talking Heads and Television and Blondie. Of course, I love Blondie and all that, and Dictators. And then I saw Alex Chilton with his show. What
Big
else?
Star?
Suicide. I saw Alex Chilton, but he wasn't in Big Star, but he at the time he was a solo. He had to put out a record on Orc Records at the time. Right. And then I saw it's the Suicide, which really was a mind blower. And I saw Devo where they were cruising through town. I saw them with Suicide actually at Max's. I saw a bunch of bands. I mean, a whole bunch of bands, like a lot of these bands that were kind of sort of, I won't say imitating or copying it, but kind of coming from that Television, kind of Patti Smith, Velvet Underground kind of vibe, like the Feelies and the Erasers and all those kind of bands I saw that were kind of cool. And who else did I see? The Cramps. Saw the Cramps.
One of my favorites.
Great. Yeah, I was so many great bands I saw, and it was tremendous. And the thing that really inspired me the most, what the kind of net result of it all was that all these bands had singles, independent singles, and that's what was going on in England too. And so I decided to put out a single when I got back to Seattle, and I put out a single, and that was like the first, or arguably the first, or one of two that were the first kind of punk singles in Seattle. And that was in like December of '77. It says '77 on the label, but it actually was in the stores until the next week, '78. But whatever. Bottom line, it was pretty darn early. And then so that single was turned out to be kind of a good PR thing for me in Seattle, and I sort of from that got together a new band, and that was this band, the Moberlys, that you mentioned.
The Moberlys, right? I wanted to ask you about
in late '78. Yeah, it took me about a year to kind of try a bunch of different things and different musicians. I work with a band called the Mentors. You probably heard of them.
I know the Mentors well. Yeah.
Yeah. I work with those guys, and they backed me up on a couple of things, and we did a live show. I went out there just in my underwear. That was a crazy show. But I mean, shit. I mean, it was, excuse me, I don't know if I can say that.
You can do anything you want, man. We're drinking on the show. Don't worry about it.
Okay, good. So the long and short of it is I had a kind of a colorful early career and put together this Moberlys band, and that's another whole chapter. That was 10 years after that. That band was together,
Yeah. And, that carried on into the early 80s. I know you came back. Yeah, you came back to New York City after that.
Yep.
And I understand you connected with some local people. You were playing with Johnny Thunders, right? Briefly.
Well, I did play with Johnny Thunders. I played with him on a couple different occasions. One was filling in for his bass player, and extensive kind of rehearsal / showcase in a studio in Manhattan on 30th and 8th Avenue, Daily Planet studio. And then one was just playing acoustic guitars in that same building. I was staying with my friend there, who I was playing in her band, and we later got married to Ann Dion, who was Alan Vega's girlfriend for many years. I know I was staying there at her place in her loft, and Johnny happened to be there, and we sat down, played some tunes together on the acoustic guitars, and that was a real honor. And then I also the Moberlys played at his 30th birthday at a club called RT Fireflies with a band who was a good friend of his from Queens, Justin Trouble.
Justin Trouble, yes.
He goes by Justin Love now. And he got up on stage with Justin Trouble's band and did a mini set. And then we did, I remember we did I Love You by the Heartbreakers and Can't Keep My Eyes on You in tribute to him that night.
Nice.
And then it seems to me that there's some other connection. Well, I've kept in touch with Walter over time, and more with him than with Johnny. And I saw Johnny a few times in LA when he came out there, and I saw him, of course, a bunch of times in New York. And I saw the Heartbreakers in '77. That was really incredible.
That must have been amazing.
Wow.
Yeah, in '77 at the Village Gate. Yeah, it was a legendary show, and I happened to get lucky. And Marty Thau, the manager of the Dolls, formerly got me into that one, and so yeah, that was incredible. But yeah, I played with a lot of different bands, but mostly the Moberlys just played around the clubs in Manhattan. We played a couple of big shows. We opened for the Romantics at the Savoy. I don't know if you guys remember that place.
Yeah, vaguely. I think I do.
Huge club in Midtown. They were trying to compete with like, some of the big Midtown clubs like Peppermint Lounge and Bonds and some of those others. It was kind of a big corporate place. I think it was run by Ron Delsner. But yeah, it was. We played that gig. We played pretty much all the clubs at Peppermint.
Are you friendly with Mike Skill from the Romantics?
I don't know him personally, but
he's up in your area.
I've seen him on. I haven't kept in touch with any of those guys in the Romantics. I like their music a lot, but
Mike was on our podcast about
a
year and a half ago, I think.
Fantastic,
and he was great. I've kept in touch with him a little bit since, but
the drummer's amazing.
There's just something about the Pacific Northwest.
Yeah.
And to be honest with you, I've always liked music out of there, but I never got this comparison until the last few years. It's comparable almost to like Detroit, to me.
Yeah, wow. Okay? That's an incredible. That's really flattering
because it's like an area. It's like an area that I'm just gonna say it. I don't mean this in a bad way. It's an area that no one gives a shit about. Okay, so it's like. It's like it has the ability.
They do now because the real estate is real expensive here. But the bottom line is, you're right. No one has given a shit about it.
I don't mean that in a bad way, because I think that in places like Detroit and places like the Pacific Northwest, you have that freedom to kind of come up with your own thing without maybe everybody's eyes on it.
I also see Cleveland being like that.
Cleveland is similar too in that way. Yeah, not too far from Detroit. Similar.
Very true.
Want to hear something funny? You know who's playing today in New York City?
Who?
Blondie and the Dams.
Blondie and the Dams.
I know. I saw that on Twitter. Yeah, that's really cool.
Captain Sensible, I think, is not part of the show.
Oh, no?
Oh, no. That's too bad. He's cool.
Yeah,
well, it's funny about Seattle, and we didn't mention one of the most obvious names and probably the pivotal name in the fate of the history of Seattle music, and that's Jimi Hendrix.
Yeah.
To me, Jimi Hendrix passed away, at 27, but I mean, he's a tremendous talent. And you can almost put him in a category with people like Elvis and the Beatles and all kinds of, the real ultimate Bowie. Absolutely. And the huge names of rock history. I mean, he kind of stamped Seattle, unfortunately, in a way that was and I think it was a combination of him and also the way the whole thing went down with the teen dance circuit and the Sonics and the Raiders and the Dynamics and all those great bands, is that Seattle was a place you had to leave to do your thing. You couldn't just be there and play rock and roll to be anything at all. And because the business in Seattle, after the teen dance circuit kind of fell apart and was no longer cool, it was kind of replaced by the Haight-Ashbury scene, basically. And so all the kids that were hip, had to go to San Francisco to do it. And like Moby Grape guys went down there. Others went down there to make it and stuff in San Francisco. So it was like a place you had to leave, and Jimmy left and blah, blah, blah. And so, when I was a kid growing up, the idea of playing in Seattle was not necessarily because you had to leave to get noticed. It was also because in Seattle, the business was really kind of what I would consider reactionary. Like, really, it was all about covers and all about, really, you had to be a certain way. And I know you guys know this from living in New York. If you ever spent time like in Long Island, or like New Jersey, they have like all the rules of what bands can do and what they can't do. If you want to do that, you have to go to New York,
Yeah.
And so
what famous club is in Seattle? I couldn't even name like what kind of clubs do Seattle have? Do they even have like an area where people go and practice and play this stuff? Do they have an area like that?
It's really funny. There's always been places where people practice in Seattle. And now Seattle, I guess at least last time I looked at the statistics, Seattle real estate is second to San Francisco, and it's higher than New York City. Wow. So Seattle is real expensive. It used to be when I was a kid, I was shocked how much it cost to get an apartment or any kind of little just flop house room in New York City. Compared to Seattle, but it's completely changed. It's real expensive. So Seattle's not like it used to be, but there's always been bands finding places to practice in garages and warehouses and, in basements of buildings after businesses close or just, bands sharing houses and practicing in the basement and getting complaints from the neighbors and blah, blah, blah. It's always been like that, It's because up until like the era of grunge, basically up until like the 90s, early 90s, Seattle's been a really cheap place to live. Lots of room, lots of places for cheap. I remember you could get a 1-bedroom for $100 a month when I first moved out of my parents' house when I was 18. Right. Yeah, I mean, you have to live in a cheap place, and probably didn't smell that great, but it was $100 a month for a 1-bedroom. 200.
And that's why
you actually get a pretty good one.
That's why you'll never see, and I hate to say it, but you'll never see another scene come out of New York City like what happened in the 70s, because it's impossible for any struggling musician to live here. Okay.
Yeah, well, I did that. So I was maybe one of the last. I did that for a while.
You were at the end of that time. Okay, because
I went there, and it was like a lot of people say, yeah, you couldn't make it in New York. Well, let me tell you what. I was working 50 or sometimes 60 hours a week on top of doing bands and playing at night and traveling all over on subways and most of the other kids I knew that were from New York, they were staying with their parents. They had friends that could help them out with things. And I was on my own, and it was tough, man. But I stuck it out for quite some time, and I loved it.
New York's always
gave me a tremendous sense of accomplishment and sense of power, of being able to handle stuff, and it took with me for the rest of my life.
Wow. Well, it's an experience, right? Always.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
Not only that, street smarts.
Of course. Well, that's what you get. You get street smarts. It doesn't take long. Going through your bio, Jim, I was really curious to something. I wanted to make sure I asked you this. You actually wrote a musical called Little Rock.
Yeah, I did. Yeah.
Tell us about that. That's interesting.
It is interesting. Well, they contacted me. This theater in Seattle contacted me to do the music for this show called Little Rock, and it was about the integration of Little Rock Central High School in 1957, when when President Eisenhower sent the National Guard to protect these 9 black kids that were integrating the first big major public high school in a major city in the South in 1957. And they hired me because of my knowledge of and my love for rock and roll and pop music and the blues and rockabilly and all that kind of stuff. And so I wrote songs kind of in that style for the characters, and with a guy who was the musical director, whose background had been more in musical theater, and he'd done a lot of plays and stuff and musicals. And so he kind of helped craft it. And he also wrote a bunch of the material too. And there was another guy who had worked for PBS and Bill Cosby and a bunch of really cool stuff. He's from New York, a guy named Arn. I forgot his name now. Shoot, I've got to find it. Was it Kermit Fraser? Yeah, he wrote the script. So between the three of us, we developed all these characters, and it had a really good run. About 70,000 people saw it in Seattle, and it was the Seattle Children's Theater Event of the Year in the Seattle Times, and it got a bunch of other good press. It was mentioned in New York Times and New York magazines. New New Yorker magazine. It was kind of a cool show. And then what happened was about 4 other theaters around the country did it. And it was really hard to do. It was a really expensive show to do because it had all these big gang scenes with all these it was a really big time show, not a small time, easy show to do. And I think a lot of people just kind of shied away from that. Cause I mean, there was like in theater, you got to hire a lot of actors. It becomes real expensive, you know? So it didn't really have the kind of life it should have had, you know? And I think it was also kind of a little bit tamed down a little bit from what it maybe could have been as far as its overall effect, because they're aiming it at children. And the other 4 theaters that did it were not children's theaters. It was more regular theaters. And so I could have maybe put some material in there that would have been a little bit more provocative, a little bit more complex. So it was quite a show. And I actually have the original cast album, which I've been sitting on for quite some time because I couldn't get the rights to release it. And I just recently got the rights to put it out and for downloads and streams. And I'm going to probably do that. I've just got a lot of other things I'm doing. So I'm going to probably get to that. Thanks for bringing that up. I'm happy about that project. And
it's a very, very interesting part of your bio. The other thing that I found very interesting was that you spent a few years as a sports website journalist.
That's
sports
correct.
Website.
Yeah, and that was
well, not only sports website and also podcast. So I did what you're doing without the camera. I did a podcast starting in 2010 and going into starting in 2009 and going up through 2016. I had a podcast called Talkin' Hoops, which I talked basketball with just everybody from major names and kind of legends to just young kids that were aspiring basketball players, to journalists, to broadcasters, to writers, to, you know, all those kinds of people, all over, from people that work for everywhere from ESPN and major networks, CBS and stuff, all the way down to just the local press and you know, NBA players and people like that, all the way down to just, you know, 16-year-old, you know, aspiring college basketball players.
Dude,
so I basically had a weekly podcast and did that. And I also wrote a column for the local ESPN affiliate of college basketball. And I was also the publisher of a sports site covering basketball and football for this area for a network that was bought out by Yahoo. So I worked in that field for from about 2005 till about 2016, for about 10 years, really, a little bit more than that probably overall. Yeah. As a side thing to make a little extra money. And actually that was a good reason how I was able to get this house built that I'm living in right now, you know, because I was doing that and also playing gigs. So working.
Seattle is a great sports town. People in Seattle, they still love the Sonic, and they haven't been there.
I know. Well, the Sonics are going to come back. I still believe. Where's Wood?
You know, the last time I went to Seattle, the football field was named Century Link, and the baseball field was Senco Field.
Yeah. Senco.
That's
yeah.
right.
Yeah, that's what it was.
They actually got a good baseball team now for the first time in a long time.
Oh yeah, good team.
Who knows how long they'll be till they screw it up, but that's okay. We'll hope for the best. You guys are so lucky with the Yankees, and you know, there's so many great. I mean, I used to go see a lot of sports when I was in New York, but I couldn't afford to go to many. But I'd go to Yankees games. They're really cheap in the bleachers, you know, and that was kind of fun. Yeah.
You know what? Where in Seattle are you? Like Capitol Hill, Queen Anne area, wherever.
Capitol Hill. Those are neighborhoods that I grew up around. I grew up by Green Lake, which is a place that a lot of people have maybe heard of, and it's kind of near the U District. Capitol Hill and Queen Anne are kind of south of that, closer to downtown. But I don't live in Seattle. I actually, the house I grew up in Seattle, I still own it because I've just kind of held it together with my family and things. And I rent it out, but I live over across what they call Puget Sound, where you have to take a ferry. You've heard about the ferries they have in Seattle?
Oh yeah,
I've heard of that. Yeah.
So I live on the other side of the Puget Sound in a little town called Indianola, which is really kind of cool and pretty laid back. And you know, it's just really nice. It's like I've really kind of I've been a city person my whole life, and I travel all the time to play gigs and do stuff, so I get plenty of time to be around people. But when I'm home, it's really nice and peaceful, and my dog can run around without being on the leash and all that kind of fun stuff, you know. Mellow. It's mellow. It's kind of boy, you know, you guys are city. You guys are so much into the city thing, and you're sitting there thinking, oh, this guy's really dull and boring. But bottom line is, you know, I've done a lot of stuff, and it's there for me, but I find I'm able to get a lot done in this environment.
It's you know, it's a little bit easier. That's really what it comes down to.
A lot of distractions. I don't have people trying to steal my hubcaps in my front yard.
Right.
You know?
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's, you know, it's getting bad again in New York. You know, it's starting.
I know. I've heard.
The old days.
I've heard.
Yeah.
My friend says it's getting back to the old ways a little bit. You know.
Yeah. Yeah. Except there's no music scene.
Let's bring the music scene back. Then it
might be better. It might be better if that happens.
The hookers and the junkies can stay. Or just bring the music back.
Just bring the music back. Exactly. Now, one thing I wanted to ask you about, if you could elaborate on this research you've been doing on Sonny Boy Williamson, the great blues musician. I'm very interested in that kind of stuff. What have you been doing related to him?
Holy mackerel! Well, that's what happened after I finished with well, when I got this house. Okay. In 2012, I left my job with 710 ESPN radio doing that site, because I got a much better job as a writer. I had been working on it for a while, and I got this job as a managing partner in this research project about Sonny Boy Williamson. So I shifted my journalism kind of cap over to the music side as opposed to sports. And even though I did keep the sports thing going with the podcast for another 4 years, I just basically focused on Sonny Boy with most of my time, other than the gigs I was doing with playing gigs, and of course raising my kid and doing the family stuff I was doing. But the bottom line is, I had always been into blues. I'd always been interested in Sonny Boy, going back to New York Dolls. Actually, I first listened to Sonny Boy because the Dolls covered that song "Don't Start Me Talking," so I listened to some of his stuff. And then, but I really got into him actually when I was doing the research for Little Rock. I went back and really listened to a lot of blues, and that was in 1994 and 1995 to kind of get more locked in with the sound of 50s blues, the sound of Chess Records and Sun Records and Modern Records and all those labels. And so I went back and listened to all that stuff. And the guy that really stuck out for me was still Sonny Boy. I go, this guy is just, there's something about him. It's just, he's got some kind of energy that I just love. And like tunes like Help Me, just there's a ton of them. I mean, Keep Your Hands Out of My Pocket. There's so many great songs. Yeah. And so many great songs. And it's like, I go, man, this stuff's great. And so I met this guy who was like a financial guy. He ran a financial company, and he's kind of a wine connoisseur, kind of a, sort of a guy that you wouldn't figure would be much of a rocker, really didn't know much about music, but he really loved Sonny Boy, and he was doing this research thing. I go, this is great. This is cool. And he had actually done a bunch of interviews of people who had, all of whom are pretty much gone now, like B.B. King and Junior Wells and a lot of people. He'd done interviews of a bunch of people about Sonny Boy. And then he kind of had to put it aside, but he finally got things kind of going enough with his company where he had the financing to kind of keep it going. But his health was also in very bad shape, so he needed help physically as well as just another person to help him with the research that maybe knew more about other areas of music. So it was a good fit for me, and I started working on this research. And I travel around. I went to Mississippi. I mean, probably a dozen or more times. I flew into Jackson or Memphis Airport. And then also just a number of other places, Cleveland, LA, Austin, Texas, all over Georgia, all of just doing research on Sonny Boy stuff. And then quite a few interviews overseas via Skype with the help of some great European people that helped me out over there. And I just did a bunch of research on Sonny Boy. We actually it could have been done a lot sooner, but this guy's health and to some degree kind of his wanting to be involved when he really was physically that unable to really be engaged. kind of put off this thing being able to really get done for a long time. And then he died.
Wow.
And so what happened was then is his brother came and got involved and kind of acted like he wanted to, finish it up, because we were pretty much done. We had this manuscript of the book. We had a documentary film that was ready to go to production. We had a bunch of other projects, including a museum exhibit that I put together with a museum to do, or that I was pretty conceptually had put together. It was close to being a deal. And he said, well, I'm going to take a look at this. And so he and I sort of worked on it for a little bit, about a year of just kind of looking through everything to try to tell him what it was and explain it to him and his family. And he finally decided he didn't want to do anything with it. So it was very disappointing. And so I went out and got the financing to kind of take the ball and figured out what I could do on my own with my own project, and was able to get the book written luckily during 2020. And then in 2021 and now 2022, it's hopefully coming to the point where it's going to be ready to publish. One reason it's taken a long time is it's being edited and fact checked, or he's being helped by a guy named Jim O'Neill, who is really fantastic. He's the co-founder of Living Blues magazine, and he's got the access to probably the greatest archive of interviews published and unpublished, and he's just probably the most recognized and well liked. I'll also add experts on the blues in the world, so I'm really fortunate to have him involved with it. It's been hard for him to get a lot done. He's kind of moving slow himself because of different things. But it looks as if things are going to be wrapping up here soon. So once he's done with it, that's that part of it. That's everything's pretty much in my control at that point to just tie everything down and get it release it and publish it.
Well, when you have that done, make sure you let us know, because we will promote this for you. Okay.
Yeah,
Well, I'll tell you, Sonny Boy's story is incredible. I mean, I will definitely let you know. And I know there's a lot of people like you who are into rock, who appreciate what he did. I mean, not only of the songs that he did that so many people covered, but just his contributions. Like, let me give you an example. That show he did, King Biscuit Time, in 1941. It was the first really major show that anybody really knew much about, that anybody played blues on the electric guitar.
Yeah. And that was the beginning of the electric guitar phase of blues. So it really was a groundbreaking show.
And kick in also kit drums. Yeah. This is the blueprint of American music. I don't know whether you're rock and roll, whether you're R&B, whether you're country music, all that, it came from that basic blueprint. Guitar player, drummer. In their case, they didn't have a bass player because you couldn't hear it on the radio. This is the way the radio was. So they had a piano player and a harmonica player, front guy that was out of his mind. And that's rock and roll. That's country. That's R&B right there. It really is. It's something that we can't lose, because this digital music has got all kinds of pluses, but I mean, real musicians playing in a band, I don't think you're ever. Well, I mean, someday I can't say you'll never duplicate with digital instruments, but they haven't done it yet.
No, I don't think you can. I think there's something about that chemistry of those people playing together,
playing and singing.
You can't duplicate. Yeah. You can get sounds, but there's no soul.
Yeah, and it's human beings. I mean, it goes before electronics. It goes before amplifications. People got together, they pounded on things, they came up with different things that made noise, and they played together. They played music and they sang.
Sometimes sometimes hitting the wrong note works. Yeah, and you're not going to get that in digitized music. A
lot of people just don't want to hear the wrong note, and the sad part about it is that some of the greatest moments in music were wrong notes.
What was it? I don't know if you ever heard the quote from Miles Davis. He says, "There's no such thing as a wrong note. It's the note you play right after that matters." And I think musicians can understand that, right?
That's great. That's brilliant. That's brilliant.
Yeah, it is. All right, Jim, I want to talk to you about some of the new stuff you've been doing over the last 2 years, 3 years. 2020, you came out with a release called Jokers, Idols, and Misfits.
Yes.
I love the title.
That's a good
Yes.
title.
What's that all about?
Well, I'll tell you, it's a collection of cover tunes, and some of them are famous people that I've looked up to in life. Some of them are people that I've worked with and are friends of mine. Some of them are just more obscure artists that I really, really liked but don't know. And some of them are kind of a mixture of both, you know. So it's kind of a it's kind of a mixture of all that. It's just like cover songs. And I thought it was kind of a unique idea for an album, and I really like it a lot. And the one before that was called Not Changing, came out in 2019, and that was kind of like sort of like my comeback album because it was all new original material, and I haven't really done one for a while. I've been so busy doing the sports thing and the Sunny Boy thing and just playing gigs for a living and raising a family and stuff. And I hadn't done much new material, so I did a whole album of new material, and that was really cool. So I hadn't done an album of new material since like 2012, and even that was one that was kind of only had about 4 new songs. There's a lot of older songs, so this was like a brand new album, and I was really proud of, and that kind of got my career going in the digital world and downloads and streams and that kind of whole world. And so, and that's when I hooked up with Big Stir and also Power Popaholic out there in New York. I don't know if you know Aaron Kupferberg.
I'm friends with him on Instagram, and
He's
sometimes I tag things back and forth to him. Yeah, he's got good
he knows the stuff. Yeah. So he and I have been working on it too. He's been releasing. I have now 5 albums on his label for streams through Bandcamp, and then I've also put all those except for Jokers. I put all those out on through DistroKid. That goes out to all the major platforms like Spotify and Apple Music and all that stuff.
Yeah, it goes out on all that stuff. That's cool.
Yeah, basically.
So what do you have lined up now?
What am I doing now? I'll tell you what I'm doing now. I'm working on a bunch of new songs. I've got about 11 demo tracks, of which about I think 4 of them are cover tunes, and I'm working on another 10 or 11 more. I want to get at least about 20 or so tracks to pick from before I decide which ones to make into records. I'm going to do a new album here soon. And then beyond that, like I said, I'm working on finishing that Sunny Boy book. And then my band is starting to really play again, the Jim Basnight band. We're really doing good. We're doing good shows, doing quite a bit of solo shows and duo shows too. I got a great band. Sean and Beth Peabody. Sean plays bass and drums, and he's even played guitar for me at times. And he sings really well, and he's a great entertainer too. And his wife Beth, who just had their second baby, but she's like 2 months ago, but you know, she's just got one of these voices where she just sings in phenomenal pitch. I mean, just fantastic ear. So she and I and Sean sing really well together. And then Michael Rollins, who's been with me since the beginning of the Jim Basnight band in New Year's Eve, December 31st, 1996. He plays sax, flute, harmonica, and percussion, and he also sings too, and he writes some songs too. And then he's also been a bass player for much of that time. He's been pretty much the longest standing bass player in the band. And then the other guy that plays bass in the band currently, is because Sean plays mostly drums, is Kurt Jensen. And he's a real solid bass player. That's all he does is focus on playing bass, and he does a good job. And moving gear. So that's what we do. We work.
Wow.
Yep.
All right. Well, listen, I want to thank you for coming on, Jim Basnight. And when you're coming through New York City, you have to stop at the International Bar, and we will take care of you. Rob works there.
Oh, okay. Really?
Yep.
Gosh.
And, definitely come out and hang out with us.
Absolutely. So we'll see you at the bar, and I look forward to seeing you too, RockerMike.
All right,
and
definitely.
We'll get together and make this stuff happen. And I'll come to New York. I'll make sure I'll bring my old school street smarts if I can do something.
It's like riding a bike. You never forget, man.
Last time I was in New York, I went out to Brooklyn into places where I literally would have been dead.
Yeah,
in broad daylight, and it was like 2-3 in the morning, and people were looking at me because they're all wearing $1,000 coats, and I'm like wearing like, you know.
Yeah. Now you're the bum, right?
It's funny.
All right, Jim Basnight, thank you for coming on, and stay in touch and let us know about that Sonny Boy Williamson book.
Definitely.
We definitely want to
Definitely
promote
will.
that. To you.
And I'll let you know about everything to do with what I'm doing. I'll keep you posted. You guys doing a great job out there. This is a really fun show. Thank you for letting me monopolize your time. I definitely took up 90% of the.
It was our pleasure. It was our pleasure.
Thanks.
Thank you, sir. You take care now.
Nice to meet you. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
I'm getting lumped up with RockerMike and Rob Rossi. I'm getting lumped up with RockerMike and Rob Rossi. Well, I'm lumped up, but I'm okay. It's gonna get lumped up anyway. You better call back the posse. Just getting lumped up with RockerMike and Rob Rossi. Getting lumped up with RockerMike